growth should return at 1 or 2 or 3%. Why? Because the investment in breeding of animals and grasses and in education and in skill level and in all of the things that have happened in the past will provide small, not big, small productivity improvements.
Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, in part 2 of our conversation with David Beca, we discuss the rise in global demand for milk and the scope of milk-producing nations to meet this demand.
Firstly, what it's worth considering is that the international markets require very often over time or somewhere between a 1 and a 3% increase in international milk supply. So that's somewhere within that area is where the demand has been increasing, and there's no sign that that's going to change, and which is a real positive. I mean, dairy's extraordinary product. It will remain in essential demand if you when you look at what dairy products provide. And the 1 to 3% depends on economic conditions around the world, whether there's and right now I guess we're going into a period when things are a bit tougher, so maybe demand will fall down towards that 1% and then it'll lift, and it's how we match supply to that which is worth often considering. And certainly I'm a big believer that it's really healthy and useful often to look outside your country, or really it's outside the farm gate. Was obviously a really good thing to compare with other farmers outside the country is important, because it's very easy to become insular and think there's something wrong or right going, and it's not. And when you look outside, it can really help from that point of view. So, if I look at the Irish growth in milk supply over the last 20 odd years, I could actually say, it's very clear that it was very flat and restricted while quotas were there and had been for some time. And then you've had this great burst, which I could say has allowed you to catch up with a few countries, go past a few, and maybe it's got some analogies with your rugby as well. So, you've New Zealand's got a great record of growing, and there's a sign that having lagged the Kiwis for the best part of the first 10 years, that in the last 10 years you've effectively closed a lot of the growth. So if we look at your compound annual growth of your milk supply over that period, the average is now quite similar to New Zealand and some other countries like Uruguay that's grown very well, and those South Africans who damn well won that rugby trophy that was up for grabs a short while ago. They have a great record also of growing their milk supply, and those countries, give or take a bit, with you now as well, have this very good record. Other countries are not nearly as good, Argentina and the UK, and there's probably examples of reasons, and there's always often many and varied, but both those countries certainly haven't had the conditions for growth economically, and or say with the UK it would appear the focus on producing low cost milk. They've generally gone the high cost range, and so post the loss of quota their growth in their industries, in my view, would be very disappointing, and that's the growth rates will always be linked to economics. It can't be any other thing. A profitable industry that's not arbitrarily restricted from growth is always going to grow, and an unprofitable one won't. And unfortunately, I'm getting around to saying that Australia's the laggard, just like our rugby, it seems. So that by adopting production systems, high focus on cow production and a high adoption of higher concentrate and supplemented forage feeding rates, cost of production is now no longer internationally competitive, and it means over the last 23 odd years we have consistently reduced national milk supply, which is a sadness and a disaster really for the country, and it's no sign that's changing. So it's a salient lesson for what happens when farmers adopt the unprofitable or high-cost systems. And provably, when we look at milk price for Australia, it's been more than competitive over that entire period. And although some people look at Australia and say, yes, but you've had the odd drought, well, yes, that's absolutely true, as we have for the last 2 or 3 or 4,000 years. No sign of change. We've had some tougher ones in the last 30 years, and but a lot of it's not inconsistent. So that's the growth. I guess one of the interesting challenges now is that most of those countries have flattened their growth in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Your case, it could be flattening because of potential regulatory impact. New Zealand as well, I guess, is you'd say very different rigor around regulation, but again, they are not seeing the same growth, and so we've actually got a flattened supply curve. We have had some countries like China, for instance, who are huge importers, are now producing a higher proportion of their own milk, so their demand more recently has decreased. The US continues to grow consistently, so there's a whole mixed bag in where we are now. And
let's look at that a little bit, David. You talk about the growth is consistently 1% to 3%, but we are in the situation, and I mean it's anyone listening is well aware that we're potentially petering off in Ireland due to regulation. So where is that 1% to 3% going to come from?
Might not be able to answer very specifically exactly where, but I will suggest very strongly it will come, because there's a demand for it, and one way or another there will be people in countries, farmers in countries, that will want to meet the demand. Obviously, if some of the traditional contributors to that demand contribute less, then of course one thing that would happen is milk price would go up as a result if there's a mismatch of supply and demand, and that will only encourage farmers in some other places. It'll be more profitable for them to take up the difference. I think at the moment, the US looks like it's extraordinary, and when you look at its industry, is how consistent. It's the most consistent country on the planet for increasing milk supply. We keep hearing about, yes, but they're under pressure and it's a bit less or a bit more, but when you look at actually what they produce, it's extraordinary. Again, there's some positives in a confinement system from being able to plan and consistently produce milk when you're not exposed to the weather, and they are extremely good at securing productivity improvements. And so even though many people in New Zealand, and I know here as well, are now concerned with all the regulation, will you be able to continue to produce more milk? I have a different view to many, in that when countries like Ireland and New Zealand settle on new regulation, hopefully still in a satisfactory way. I know there's a lot of emotion and a lot of concern around that at the moment, but once it's settled, one shouldn't ignore the most fundamental reason why milk supply and everything else grows, and that is, if you had settled regulations, then growth should return at 1 or 2 or 3%. Why? Because the investment in breeding of animals and grasses, and in education, and in skill level, and in all of the things that have happened in the past will provide small, not big, small productivity improvements. Do everything the same, but the grass grows a little bit more because the breeders have improved the breeding. Feed and do everything the same, but the cows produce a little bit more. And remember, although we live in a time when suddenly inflation's great, on average, again, a bit like an industry, what farmers need is to secure probably, again, only 1 or maybe 2 to 3% productivity improvements every year to maintain their present profitability. Milk price would logically keep going up a little in absolute terms, but maybe not in inflation-adjusted terms, but all of this to counter inflation. So it's very easy to to take a very negative view about where this would come. So I see Ireland returning sooner or later to some growth. You initially may have to drop a little bit of milk to stick within regulations, and once that's clear, you should go back to growth. I know Fonterra in New Zealand says they've seen peak milk. How I would see it is they may come back a little bit. They are struggling at the moment until their regulation is settled in some way, and then they will go back to growth, only because, unless we say the scientists and all the support people and the farmers never get better, and history says there's always small rooms for improving. So I still expect to see that sort of growth, and there's enough places around the world that aren't producing a lot of milk for the international market, that if it's not coming from elsewhere, it'll come.
And bring us back to the US. You talk about their ability to grow. What is their export scene like? So
it's an interesting country from that point of view, in that when we look at their cost of, first, if we look at cost of production for any confinement or feedlot industry, where animals are permanently housed, compared to any industry, even when only 30 or 40% of pasture is in the diet. If the cows are walking to pasture for a proportion of their feed for some of the year, you're pasture-based. Confinement, even in a country as good and as low cost for confinement as America, cannot compete with the cost of production from pasture-based countries. Data is very, very clear. US is the best at confinement. They're on average some of the best business people in dairying, but they also have consistently some of the lowest cost maize silage as one feed, the lowest cost and good quality alfalfa or lucerne, and comparatively low cost grain. So, and they still can't compete. They can't nowhere near Ireland's cost of production or New Zealand's, and even us Australians who've got pretty poor at this, they still is more. So there's this interesting concept that the US. There were two really big shifts in the international dairy market between about 2007 and 2012. One was the US, and they went from having very low export volumes to becoming one of the biggest exporters in the world. And they export 15-17% of their annual volume. And the other big change was China went from being I'll call it an irrelevancy in the dairy market to becoming a huge importer. And over that period, it changed international dairy markets forever for everybody. There used to be an Oceania milk price, a lower one for us in the Southern Hemisphere compared to the Northern Hemisphere in Europe. That disappeared. It flattened the international dairy market, which is a challenge for everybody, including the EU, including Ireland. And the premiums that the EU and you guys got here and all domestic markets received disappeared. So it's a very much more an even playing field, unless you're a country that locks foreign dairy products out of the market, and that's not you and not Australia or not most countries. So, but the interesting thing, coming back to the cost of production of the US, it actually means for every extra kilo or tonne they export, they average down their milk price to a potentially lower price than the bulk of their industry can profitably produce milk at. So although if you look at their performance over the last 20, 30 years, it looks like they'll just keep on going and keep producing more milk, they will struggle economically to produce significantly more proportion of their volume for the international market. So in this case, I'm almost saying even America, which looks like it could contribute, will do in my view. And if milk price goes up anyway, then that will help. But none of the story's simple, you could say. It's just what will happen is that milk will come, in my view. There's a demand for it. It's a fantastic product. You've got to you got to say that the last 400 years or millennium of time is somehow is going to be different, to not say the markets are demanding it and we will not supply it. For me, I'm on the side of hoping that Ireland is a big part of the future story. Not that you're nowhere near peak milk at the moment. For me, for your country, that'd be very sad, a tragedy. I always talk about so many countries only having certain things that they are genuinely internationally competitive about. I can joke about my country of birth, but not my country of choice, New Zealand. But the only thing they're good at is dairy. Dairying is effectively their entire, dominates their future, and they are hurting their future when they say we're not going to continue to work at producing more milk. And what's undoubted is obviously there's a range of things the Irish do well, but dairy farming, pasture-based farming, and dairy farming in particular, exceptionally good at. And to decide that the country won't be developing and designing a future to encourage that industry to continue to grow is actually to, in my view, reduce or limit the future of the country. And it'll be a pity if that's the case. If I'm looking 10 or 15 years ahead, I'm hoping that Ireland will be a big part of the story of continuing to produce this extraordinary product for the world market.
And it is very refreshing to hear that. And in a lot of ways, when you talk to a group of farmers, it is often a downbeat conversation at the moment. There are challenges in relation to, costs and milk price, but there's also, I suppose, a narrative that we're doing a really bad job and we're really damaging the environment, while, every effort has been made to be better. And we acknowledge that there are some problems to be fixed, but it is nice to hear that. And hopefully, we will continue to prosper as a dairy producing nation. I suppose if we look specifically then at Ireland and our production system, if there was a key strength and I suppose an area for improvement that you could pick out, I suppose something we're doing well to pat us on the back, and by the same token then something to give us a kick up the ass and say you need to work better on this, guys.
Okay, that's for me that's a simple question this time. So. Because the pasture production and the production system, despite some challenges around, is there some production system drift? The industry's in a phenomenally good position. I'm so impressed. I was anyway, but it's been fantastic to have the opportunity to come here, and I'm so impressed with the focus around low cost of production systems, the drive for pasture. And talking with the people, including within the whole research and support, and then also out on farm. I mean, it's I can give a big pat on the back. I think it's as good as anywhere in the world, if not second to none. It's really exceptional. So here's the kick in the bum. And that's that despite that, the wonderful focus and the clarity and concept of how to make money, if there's a weakness, it's around business and analysing business performance and focusing on robust calculation of the important ratios that support all the discussion. So in this case, even the methodology and the regularity that pasture harvest and pasture percentage of the diet, these key things are done, is not nearly as strong as it could be, and the positive being it wouldn't be difficult to with a bit of focus to improve that, and then linked to that is there's lots and lots of room on this financial and physical business analysis performance. It's actually I guess it is. I feel it is actually a weakness. It's definitely a weakness, and it would be. And some of the pieces of the puzzle are almost in place, but yes, I don't want to kick too hard. But if some of the farmers here went to a place, one of the best places to go if you want to see how empowering business analysis and when farmers have this information at their fingertips, is funnily enough South Africa. They're not bad at their rugby either, unfortunately. In that. You go on most farms there with the farmers, and they will drop in front of you openly a full business analysis and want to know, and then want to discuss it with you. And here there's not a lot of evidence that the sort of analysis that I would have completed and never worked without for 30 years on any farm in any country I'm not seeing much evidence of here. So that's the challenge, I think, the opportunity, we'll call it.
Yeah, and then that is like, a weakness or an area of challenge. There is so much opportunity in that, and it's funny when I think about what you're saying. We're very comfortable with grass and cows. We can grow and utilise grass. We can keep animals healthy, get cows and calf, calve cows in the spring and get them back into milk. These are all things we're really good at. And, when you think about it, then it is to step outside that comfort zone and educate ourselves and become familiar on the financial side.
No, it is. One thing I also feel from my time here is that it's actually the right time and a very important time. I'd be encouraging the industry to really do something about this and focus on how to develop it, because what actually happens is, because the underlying core concepts are embedded in the discussions in Ireland, the positives and everything that I hear being talked about and done, even if not everyone agrees, but they're embedded in how people discuss things. You could say, well, that's good, and is that all we need to do? And what you learn in any business or in any of these situations is that core belief and understanding works fine until there's change. And when you're forced to change, you haven't got the foundation without that business analysis to understand how to respond. And of course, you guys are being forced to change. All the regulation and all these things mean suddenly it's, how do we respond to this? And that's what's so noticeable, is without that analysis, there's lots of discussions that even I've been semi-part of already, which lack the information on which to even make decisions. In other words, people are just saying, well, maybe we should do, or could we do this, as opposed to, if we analyse it this way, we'll know. So I think it's a great time for the industry to be thinking hard about whether this should be a big focus of trying to embed more of this in the business, because I think you're going to really need it. And actually, there's going to be some farmers who are going to suffer otherwise because say, you're being forced to change some of your systems, and there's not this foundation for making good decisions. You may have to learn a lot by your mistakes, and that's never the best way to learn, because it takes time and you lose some money along the way.
That's great. Thank you, David.
Pleasure.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to David Beca for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.